No.
Okay. Historically, heralds are the voice of the nobility. We're the ones who do all the announcing, the yelling.
It's Darren.
Hi, Darren. How are you?
Sean wants to join in on your class as well for beginning heraldry.
Have a seat. Could you do me a favor?
Absolutely.
They provided a form for sign up, but they didn't provide a pen. And the only ones I have with me are up in Linda's red basket.
I've got one in my pocket here.
Thank you.
Or should have one in my pocket here.
Yeah, that's normally my answer. Mine's missing as well. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
How are you this morning?
Good. Really good. Still kind of.
Haven't seen you since. Congratulations.
Thank you. I will let you get to class and we can chit chat.
We're just, since I have a limited number at the moment, we're just kind of being general discussion as opposed to formal classing.
That works. That works.
I didn't really, this is not really a 9 a.m. kind of class, you know?
Right. It's you have to wake up.
Yeah, well, not only that, but most of the newcomer types generally don't show up that early, and that's really what it is. What are these crazy people called heralds, you know?
Right. And I got persona development after you, so.
Okay.
All right.
See you later. See ya. Anyway, heralds are, in the literal sense, the voice of the nobility. In the society sense, we're the voice of everything. So if you hear announcements being made at an event, it's usually a herald. If you hear the voice of in court calling the awards, reading them out, it's a herald. Those are our most visible jobs. In addition to being the people who call the fighters on the field, announce the results of individual combats, things of that nature. Invisible jobs, we have bunches of those too. Also in the field, you have the mistress of the list or the master of the list. This is the person who actually conducts the list tree and maintains it and orders it. You have, in the research departments, we do handle the arms and armor, the devices, the research for name research, and the registration process for that, and a number of other side effects as well. But yeah, we're kind of everywhere. It's one of those all the time kind of jobs. There's always heralds working at something. Master Taryn, who just left, I actually took over my current job from him. He's the former lantern. I'm the current lantern. You'll hear a lot of weird titles. Most of them don't mean a whole lot, except in the sense they designate certain jobs. In my case, Lantern Herald for the Kingdom of Meridies, I am the Heraldic Education Officer for the Kingdom. The principal herald of the kingdom, the boss, is the beacon. All of ours, yes, you catch the theme, have something to do with beacons, lights, etc., etc. So we have beacon, torch, trumpet, etc. So, where'd you like to go from there?
Go right ahead. Whatever you want.
Well, let's see, what did I have down next? First thing I need is my reading glasses so I can see the broadside of a barn.
Yep.
Now I've been the subject and property of the I Foundation here in Birmingham for about 15 years. I've put several of their children through college. So my detailed vision is nothing to write home about. So, let's see.
Y'all good?
At the moment, yes.
Okay. Anything you need, holler at me.
Well, you might want to check on the other rooms. They put in a sign-up sheet, but we did not have a pen.
Okay.
I connived one off
I
of
can get you
Tara.
a pencil in just 2 seconds.
A writing implement, but yeah, we connived one off of Tara, but you might want to check the others.
There.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's see. All right, we'll just go ahead over a general thing on the arms and armor concept. You see, you know what heraldry is in the traditional sense. That is the device you see on somebody's shield, their coat of arms. In the society, the herald's office is the one that we both handle the research for. We help people design them, and we also create the rules by which they're registered and tracked. So a device is simply that. It is the arms okay, I'm going to avoid that term for a minute. It is the image that somebody chooses. It becomes arms, the coat of arms, literally, when that person gains an award of arms, the most basic level of elevated order you can get. At that point, you have for
Writing implement.
Oh, okay. Well, I said we can knock one off of Tara, but you might want to check the others. But at the point you gain that, it becomes arms, because the term refers to a person who is armigerous, or has an award of arms, is entitled to bear arms in the presence of the crown. Which means if you don't have it, technically you have to take off all your sharp pointy bits before you get within 10 feet of them, which can be really funny going into court sometimes.
Yeah.
Had a fellow many years ago who used to make something of a hobby out of it just to see how many items he could put on him. I saw him take 15 minutes one time just to account for all of them. But so if you want to design for your persona, the other thing that Taryn will be talking about, your name and your device, we're the people who help with that. We also are the people who register it. So there's a registration system that works nationally within the society. It's not a fast process, but it is a very thorough one. So when you submit it to the Herald's office for registration, it first goes to the kingdom level. At the kingdom level, they will then assemble all the submissions for a given period, usually about 30 days, put them into an internal letter of comment that goes out within the kingdom primarily to people who specialize in research on armory and names. They go over it and see if they can find conflicts, because we want to make sure that each person's is individual and unique. So that goes for both their name and their armory. The commenters will go through and look for conflicts. We'll look for lack of a better word, errors. We try to stick to period materials. You can't use just anything. There are a list of approved charges. There are a few charges that, because of modern connotations, we avoid. Swastikas are an excellent example. Yes, they're very period. They're actually all over the place in period, but in modern connotations, they draw you all kinds of attention you really don't want. So we try to avoid things like that. But that's what they do. The commenters will go over it, and when they think they've come up with all of the answers, the resulting letter will be reviewed within Kingdom. They'll decide what passes and what doesn't based on those findings, and then they send it to National. Then the whole thing happens all over again, except over on a national level. So after they finish their commentary period, the Laurel Sovereign at Arms, which is the senior herald for the society, will review all of those items, and they'll issue a letter of acceptance and returns. It takes about 4 to 6 months on average. Like I say, not a fast process, but a thorough one. So other than that, let's see. The other function of the Herald's office is often to provide, you ever read any Robert Heinlein?
No, sir.
Okay. There's a concept in some of his books referred to as a fair witness. The Herald's office is by its nature neutral. So in the cases of internal dispute, it's often the Herald's office that acts as arbiter. We're the mediators in between argumentative parties often. So we act as a neutral third party in many cases. That's one of the reasons the Herald's office is operated on a slightly separate footing from any other office. We're answerable primarily to our national chain, not to the local. So, other than that, that covers the big stuff. Like I say, I was kind of more anticipating this as a question and answer kind of deal with more people, which is why I really want to do it more in the afternoon. But what would you like to know? Is there any? I mean, you can ask me anything. I've been in the society forever, so any questions you have in general, I'll be happy to answer as well. Look through there and see if there's anything that strikes you.
So it says, how do you identify her?
There is that. Yes, the easy way is if you see this symbol, crossed gold trumpets on a green field. That is the badge of the Herald's office nationally. The more complicated way is a thing called a tabard. A working herald, that is one who is currently in service doing something, will be dressed in an armorial tabard. The one depicted in there is actually one that belongs to, you can get one of those too if you want to.
It's right here.
Yeah, there. The one depicted in there is actually one of the ones of the English College of Arms of the Crown. It's the royal tabard of one of the Crown heralds. Tabards are armorial depictions, usually depicting who that herald represents. So, in the case of this kingdom, it would be the kingdom arms, which are on there, forming the body of the tabard. In the case of a local group, it would be the group's arms of some kind, or something similar. But that one, the complicated one that's depicted in the black and white is, like I say, one of the royal ones of England. So it is quartered England, France, and Ireland. So yeah, they're pretty distinctive if you see one. I don't currently have an operating one. I need to make a new one. I gave away my last one.
Okay, and then also talks about the garment.
The what?
The garment that you wear.
That's the tabard.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. They come in several shapes. That's one of the reasons I kind of left that vague is, but the one thing they'll all have in common is they're largely paneled. They'll have a large set of arms on them. Another term for it is a surcoat. In the case of a tabard, it's usually fairly specific. And unlike the surcoat, say, you look at the typical picture of a crusader where the surcoat's on and it's belted, the tabard's usually worn over and unbelted. Basically, it's a big dress. But it'll be very colorful because it will be a large depiction of the arms of some group or individual that herald represents. You can also tell them by they're loud. That's our job usually, is to be loud. Voice projection and
that's
using the voice is a skill that everybody doesn't have and not everybody can learn. It's there, especially if you're working on the field where you're calling fighters for 4 or 5 hours at a time. It's very easy to burn your voice out and wind up sounding like a choked chicken.
That's also to be loud.
Working field heraldry is a. People say, well, all you're doing out there is talking. Yeah, but if you're out there for 4 or 5 hours or longer, I've been on the field from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. sometimes, and it gets wearing. Not to mention toasty in the South.
Yeah.
But yeah, that picture, that style of tabard is a fairly typical one, short sleeved with mid-length. But you'll see them in several other varieties, some longer, some shorter. Every now and then you'll see a simple baldric with the badge or arms on it. Here in the South, those are kind of popular too, because a full tabard in high summer can be kind of warm.
Gotcha.
We used to have one that we kept in the barony years ago. It was very old, from the dark days before we really got more accurate about the way we do things, and it was made of polyester. Yeah, you might as well put on a thermal blanket.
Yeah.
It didn't breathe at all. So yeah, getting a little toasty on that one was. We used to draw lots to see who got stuck with it. Like I say, our biggest job really is the working functions of the Herald's office, which is our announcing functions, things like that. The complicated one is the research side. Designing unique arms and names is a very involved process because there are a lot of fairly complex rules. There's a link provided in there to the standards for evaluation of armory and names, or SCA, names and armory rather. That is the rule book that we use. That's the current version that the Society has. That's version 6 since I've been a herald. Because every time you make a new set of rules, somebody comes up with a new way around them. It's just the way of the nature of the beast. For one thing, we're trying to impose a set of rules on a concept. Heraldry, as we know it formally, really doesn't exist until you get to about 1300 and from there on. The Society, however, covers everything from about the fall of the Roman Empire on up. So a lot of those earlier cultures, me for example, I'm a Viking, the Norse don't really have a concept of formal heraldry. They just, oh, I like the look of that, I'm going to put it on my shield. So trying to convert a non-heraldic culture and create arms that you can then pass under rules that are really based on a later period, life gets tricky sometimes. In my case, I was able to use several elements of Norse items that I could translate to a later period and pass them that way. I just draw them in the earlier style. And that's usually the answer for most people. When you get into other cultures, take Chinese, for example, life gets really complicated because they have their own system of heraldry that is completely different from ours, and it predates Western heraldry by about 1,000 years. Research is the hardest part of the job. I have a far better library than any of the local libraries do, and it keeps growing. I'm at about 4,500 volumes.
Ooh.
And it specializes in Norse studies, heraldry, and related.
So most of yours is in Viking.
A lot of it, yes. I have a huge Viking section. I think I'm at about 1,400, 1,500 books.
Yeah.
Just on Norse. It's also what my degree is in. So that helps.
So you major in history.
Yes. I have the world's most useless degree unless you want to teach. I have a dual major in history and English literature.
Wow.
Literature, no.
Say what?
Literature, no. History, yeah.
Well, like I say, both of them are functionally useless unless you want to teach.
True. That is
Yeah.
true.
But that's mostly what I do these days. No, the English lit is actually a kind of trap. It's actually Norse literature, but the university doesn't have a name for that. So anything that falls under Western Europe, pretty much they call English lit. And yeah, not really. I spent a lot of time learning Old English, Anglo-Saxon, Old Norse, etc. They call it English lit, and I'm like, not really. But like I say, they don't have a title for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's if you're going to do, for instance, a coat of arms for somebody from Roman Empire period, the Romans did have a form of heraldry. So many of the elements that can be found in Roman art, etc., can be used. You just have to find the right terminology to make them fit. If you're going to do names, we have two core rules that really make the difference. One is geographic consistency, and the other is temporal consistency. So you can put together name elements as long as the two cultures in question had contact with each other within the period you're after. So you can combine English and Norse, because the English and the Norse in various forms had plenty of contact with each other, whether they liked it or not. Mostly not. So in my case, my first name, Alan, is Anglo-Saxon. My second name, Lothan Larson, is Norse, because I play based on my character around York during the Danelaw when it was a mixed Anglo-Saxon-Norse settlement. So you can combine numerous other types of cultures the same way, which is actually not that uncommon in period. You just don't, unless you look in the dark corners, you don't hear about it that much, because people focus on the things that are big, well publicized. So, everybody knows who Herald Hardrada is, more or less, if you know Norse history. But there are a lot of other characters that they may not know that come from very mixed backgrounds. For instance, there were African blacks among the Norse. People don't realize it, but there were. Because the Norse stole anything they got in their hands on. They'd go someplace, they'd find something, they'd trade for it. If they could, they'd take it. If not, they'd come back and take it that night. That wasn't unusual at all. It's one of the nice things about playing Viking. You get to use a little bit of everything. This is true of actually a lot of cultures. There's a lot more mixing. There's a myth about, you find in some of the old history books that say most medieval people never traveled more than 20 miles from their home. It's a myth. People traveled a lot. To give you an example, there's a grave was found in Gotland in Sweden. And when they excavated the grave, they found a little figure about that big. And it's made of bronze. It dates from the 8th century. It was made in India. It's a seated Buddha. It was buried in a personal grave in Gotland in 900. Like I said, anything they could trade for, they would. Anything they found they liked, they bring it home. So it's not unusual to find Arabic coins in Norse graves. It's not unusual to find, they just excavated 3 bodies in outside of London. They're Chinese, and they date from somewhere in the 1100s. So there was a lot more travel and a lot more interaction than is often supposed. So within the Herald's office, we try to take that into account. What we do try to avoid are mixes that would have been unlikely. For instance, yeah, there's some evidence that the Anglo-Saxons were aware of the Far East, but there's no evidence they had regular connections. So you're not going to combine Anglo-Saxon and Mandarin. Okay, that won't fly. You're also not going to be able to combine, say, 5th century Roman, which is a particularized form of Latin, and 14th century Italian. Yeah, they both come from the same place, but they don't actually have much relationship to each other. That would fall outside our temporal consistency rules. So working that out with a herald on what you want as a persona and what you want to involve in it, that's one of the more complicated aspects of this, of what we do. Most of the rest of it is really a lot of grunt work, running, yelling. We do a lot of that. So, anything else?
Yes. How do a person start off doing that? You know, looking at it.
That's okay. There are a lot of different ways to do that. People take different tacks. My name, for example, my first name, A-L-A-N, is a variant on the spelling of my own middle name, A-L-L-E-N. So, my last name, Lothan Larson, translates to Harry Larry's son. My dad, his name was Larry. He had a beard when I was younger. I used to make all kinds of jokes about it then. Yeah, funny thing how I turned out. So people take their names from different things. Sometimes it's just a variant on their own mundane name that they just translate into a more period form. Sometimes it's a particular entity that they want to do. So Casey, God, I can't remember his last name right now. Anyway, he's in Atlanta. He decided that what fascinated him was the high Italian court of the Renaissance. So he became Orlando Cavalcante. He created a persona based on a typical upper class Italian nobility family of the period, which fits him very well because now he is Duke Orlando Cavalcante and has the titles to go with it. A lot of times, yeah, it'll be one of those 2 variants most often. Either somebody will choose some variant on their own name, or they'll have some particular place and time that they have an interest in, and they'll seek elements from there. If you're looking at a place and time, there are a number of books and sources to start with. Family Search online is actually a pretty good one. They have records going well back into period. So looking for name elements, they're not a bad place. There are some books. There's a particular naming book by a man named Whithacum, which is one of the standard resources because it cites from the old rolls of arms and like things like the Doomsday Book, the first censuses and things. Then all of those name elements are well documented and easy to replicate. Right now I'm working on a name for a friend who wanted Romanian, 13th, 14th century Romanian. Well, unfortunately, Romania, they're a little schizophrenic. They've been invaded so many times that the naming practices in Romania, how they actually assemble the name, has changed about 5 times. Sometimes it's patronymic first, surname last. Sometimes it's the other way around. At one point, they were basically using the Russian practice of multiple name by family. Yeah. You know, there are books for all of this, and that's why, like I say, the easiest thing is to consult with a herald who knows it, because the sources are wide and varied, and there are a lot of books out there. Particularly these baby naming books, they're awful. The people who write them just pick names because they think they sound good, and they find some reference that says, "Oh, this is Welsh." Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Do you actually have any documentation for that? The answer is usually no. Welsh is a very complex language. not nearly enough vowels in it. So yeah, it's hard to find good sources. We have books. You can go to the SCA Herald's websites and they list a number of good sources. But consulting with a herald directly is the easiest way, because the sources change as new books come out, or we find things out about old ones. And it's like, well, we used this book years ago, but now we know more and not so good. There are practices we did back in the 70s that will make people laugh today. For armory, for instance, we used to allow people to make up their own monsters. No, not anymore, because we realized we were running into a can of worms. One of the things that makes heraldry work the way it does, the thing on there with the blazon, that picture of the arms and the description that goes with it, blazoning arms is a kind of science, and it's a foreign language. So every term in there means something very specific. So when you say a lion rampant, it doesn't just mean a lion doing something growly. It means specifically a lion standing on 1 foot with 3 feet raised with his mouth open in exactly this position. And it will always mean exactly that. So each position has a specific name. When we allowed people to make up their own monsters, we realized, how do we replicate that? If somebody reads this 10 years from now, but doesn't have a picture of the original, how are they going to replicate it? So these days we're a lot stricter about things like that. And the naming practice is the same way. If you look at some of the early names that passed, there are things in there that contain Elvish out of Tolkien. And while Tolkien was a brilliant man, and yes, every language he used is actually based on a real one. All of his languages were developed from real ones. He's a very, very gifted linguist and onomastics genius. None of them are actually real. So while they're very close to the originals, they're not quite. But we have names in some of the places that are actually based on Tolkien Elvish, dating from the 70s or so. But then every now and then something will surprise you. Have you seen the movies or read the books?
No, thank you.
Oh, okay. There's a creature in them that's basically a big, unpleasant wolf-type animal that the orcs ride called a warg. Turns out that warg is a real word. It's Welsh. And it refers to a type of wolf. So you never know where you'll find a real one, but not all of them. Doing the research to figure out which are which is the hard part. That's always the fun thing, is trying to work something out. A friend of mine who's here, his society name is Herald Cadwallader. He actually made up the name based on something he read in a book many, many years ago for a gaming character. And when he joined the society, we were like, well, we can try and see what we can find. And actually, we were able to find documentable examples of both name elements within period. So you never know what will work, but doing the research can be tedious. Actually, sometimes it can be mind-numbing. Especially, like I say, Welsh. You know much about Welsh?
No, sir.
Okay. The Welsh have a peculiar language. They use a lot of idiomatic specialties, like the double D. You'll see a Welsh name with D-A-Y-D-D. What does that spell? Yes, it's a trick question. It's okay. It spells Daith. The double D stands for a TH sound in Welsh. So when you're trying to document Welsh, it gets complicated. The Welsh are a literalist language. They're like German. When we say ballpoint pen, all right, in German, there is no word for ballpoint pen, so you have to make it up. And the total word is Sphären something, I can't remember it now, Kugelschreiber. It's about 14 syllables long, it's about like that. Even the Germans don't try to say it, they just call them, whereas we would sometimes say Bic, they say Kuli, short for Kugelschreiber, which refers to a type of pen. In some of these languages, if you're trying to document a name, you run into things like that. There is no direct translation for certain things. So you have to get what that language uses in an approximation. And it might be much, much longer, much, much shorter, or interpretable in multiple different ways depending on what you put it with. Some languages, what elements you combine them with. Chinese is a good example. Chinese symbol for woman is very basic. Chinese symbol for a household is the symbol for woman, the symbol for a man, and a symbol for a house. The Chinese symbol for chaos is 2 female symbols and a house. 2 women under one roof. Chinese have a sense of humor. So yeah, researching these things is the hard part, and that's where you wind up building up enormous libraries, because collecting the source material, just finding it. There's a lot of it. Fortunately, these days, there's more and more of it available online. There's a lot of stuff that can be found out there. Once upon a time, when I started, when I started, cut and paste still meant scissors and Elmer's glue. When we were putting together letters of intent for registry, we were literally 10 or 12 people sitting around a table, cutting things out of the submission forms and pasting them up on a form to take them to the photocopier. It made life more interesting. Today it's all electronic, so back then the submissions process took 6 months to a year. We've got it down to 4 months to 6 months now, and that's mostly because of the commentary period, where at each level there's the time where it sits out while people do the research on it. So, conflict, and speaking of armory, we check for conflict against anything inside the society and limitedly outside. So the classic example of English heraldry, the 3 lions on red, you're not going to get that, because that would be claiming to be the head of the House Plantagenet. You're not going to get that. We check against most major famous houses, royal symbols, a few mundane trademarks that are particularly notable, and a number of specialty items which fall under different categories, including modern hate symbols, modern governmental insignia, things like that. So other than that, though, it's still mostly open. The list that we actually block is relatively short. We try to avoid adding things to it if we can. Every once in a while we get one that we just really don't have a choice about, because it brings too much trouble, or in some cases the owners of that item are too obnoxious. For instance, anything that's got a copyright by Disney, forget it. Because those people got no sense of humor whatsoever. They will write you a lawyer letter saying cease and desist so quick you'll never even know what happened. But yeah, that's that's one of the issues we have to take into account. Okay, does that cover what you were wondering?
Yes, sir.
Anything else? Just anything. We have time until Taryn shows up.
Yep. Come on, that's so
Yeah, he's got the next class in this slot.
What time period to go with? I know there was 2 sets of Murphys at the time.
Mm-hmm.
One was Westland. I can't remember where the other one is, because there's 2 set of coat of arms.
Well, okay, most of those arms you'll see advertised publicly.
Right.
Don't worry about them. Don't even try to think about them, because frankly, most of that is grossly wrong. A lot of what the various coat of arms companies and things published is Victorian.
Okay.
It's not actually period. There was a trend started in the late 1700s and went all the way through the early 1900s, of families that were not of the old nobility, etc., but came into money as the industrial age grew, to buy themselves nobility. So they made up a whole lot of coats of arms and things that never existed prior to that, and assigned them to various families and names that never had them prior to that point. So there's a lot of stuff out there from that era up through the Victorian era that are not applicable to period and really don't matter anyway. Any device you choose is going to be unique to you. You can't use one that's already in existence.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So yeah, now you can use elements like, I know somebody who's very much into their Scottish heritage, so from their clan they used elements of the clan arms. in designing their own, but theirs are not the clan arms.
Okay, give an example.
Well, for let's say, I can't remember which clan it is, but their featured primary charge is a stag, and I believe it's 3 acorns. So you could take that same basic set of symbols and either use the stag's head by itself with some other symbols or change the colors. Or you could take that image in its own, combine it with something else, and or change the colors. But it can't be the exact version of the original.
Gotcha.
What we look for, and when we talk about difference between arms, there must be 2 clear differences. Now, those differences can vary. Usually, the best one is color change, for starters. The second one is a change in what we call the primary charge. So, if your arms are that stag's head and the 3 acorns, the stag's head is the primary charge, the acorns are secondary. So, if this one was gold with green stags and acorn, you wanted to do the same thing, but you can't combine it with that one, the first thing you want to do is change the background color. So let's make it blue with a silver stag and acorns. So that's a change in both background color and color of the primary charge group. Then, just to make sure, we're going to rotate the stag from head on to sideways. So that's a change in position of the primary. That would actually give you more than 2 clear differences, and then they would be at that point clear of each other. But they would still contain the same elements.
Right.
So you can do things like that. You can add borders. You can add other elements. You might, let's say, take out the acorns, change them for pine cones. That's a change of the secondary charge group. And as long as there's something that's distinctly visually different from what it was before. So changing from, let's think of something that's very similar to each other. Changing from coins to oranges wouldn't be sufficient because coin and orange look just like each other. See, that would be a problem. You want something that's actually going to have a distinct visual difference. That's the basics of counting conflict. Now, there are a lot of variants because you can do things. There's so many things you can do in armorial design in the sense of, you can see the arms on there that have the pale.
Right.
Well, you can do a pale. You can also do things to a pale, like the edges can be made of a certain shape, either like embattled, like a castle wall, or pointed, or what they call rayoni, which looks like flames. There are several variants of the lines of division that can be done. So all of those can count as difference between 2 sets of arms as well. The modifications are literally almost infinite. There are a couple of good books on the subject. One that's interesting to look at, and you can find it in full text free online, is A.C. Fox Davies' The Art of Heraldry. It's mostly Victorian. He wrote it at the turn of the last century. But his history of heraldry in the book and all of the elements of heraldry are very good anyway. Just don't take into account certain things he says, like for colors. The Victorians recognized colors that we don't. We only do the classic original style. We have 2 metals, gold, silver, and red, black, green, purple, blue. That's it. That's all the colors you can use. Basic rule is you can't put a color on a color and a metal on a metal. So, if you have a black field, the only thing that can go on it is silver or gold. If you have a red field, again, the only thing that can go on it is silver or gold. Generally. There are a couple of minor exceptions, but I won't get into the fine print. If you have a divided field, however, so let's say you've got one that's quartered, and you've got red and black. Actually, let's even do it better than that. You've got red and silver. Because that field is equally divided of both a metal and a color, the charge on it can be anything, color or metal. We have weird rules. Anything that's considered a fur. Okay, the furs are the weird colors. You've seen things, you know what ermine looks like. White with weird little tail shapes. Terran's hat had ermine fur on it. That's what ermine is. It's considered a fur. Furs are always composed of a color and a metal. So, white with black spots, or peen, which is its alternative, is black with gold spots. Those are considered neutrals. So as long as the charge has contrast, as in is visible, you can put anything on top of those. So that's why I say the number of elements you can use and the way they can be combined is almost infinite. Designing armory is both very, very easy and incredibly complicated. Conceptually, it's relatively easy. Making sure everything lines up and avoids conflict is where life gets difficult. That's why idiots like me who've been doing it for multiple years are the ones who usually wind up doing the fine print. There's a whole lot of little catches that can snag you about the rules of division and things. For instance, there's a type of field division, which I'm sure you've probably seen at some point, anywhere you've ever seen these pictures, called gyrony. This is where it's divided both in a quarter and in X. So you wind up with 8 panels of alternating colors. Well, in the case of a gyrony, that's 8. Our rules say that anything of more than 6 can't be of certain colors because it becomes visually muddy. So there's a catch there you have to kind of be prepared for. It's best if you just go ahead and do it as a color and a metal, because those are always considered to be good contrast. But for instance, if you do 6 divisions, which you can do, you can do it of green and black, which green and black don't really have very good contrast, and they're normally not a good choice, but I have seen a couple because people just like their colors. I've seen green and other things, and I'm like, green and purple, for instance, that just makes my head hurt. There's certain things that just shouldn't be. Taryn specializes in god-awful heraldry. He periodically posts designs of things that will make your eyes cross, just to see if it's possible to do under the rules. Because one of the other rules that we do carry is complexity. For each element, charge, division, color, etc., that counts 1. If you get to a complexity count of 8 or more, the college starts to go. I've seen him do a couple that got up around 16. So, but yeah, that's the main. Those are the big things. But yeah, so you're looking at Galen. Galen could fall into a couple of different cultures: Scots, Welsh, Irish. So which one were you kind of leaning toward?
Irish.
Okay. So Murphy is no problem in Irish. It's well documented. In fact, it's documented several different ways. When you encounter most of these things, as period changed, going from the earliest to modern, it's not unusual for these things to alter in their spelling, because as Gaelic, the language, began to merge with Proto-English, that is Old English or Anglo-Saxon, and then into modern English or something approximating it about the time of the Renaissance, the language changed. So spellings change, sometimes pronunciations change. There's more than one way to spell it, there's more than one way to set it up. But as a basic name, that will work. It would work so well, I'm almost certain you're going to run into conflict. If there's not another Galen Murphy out there, I'd be stunned. Now, the easy way around that, there are 2. One, you add a third element. So Galen blank Murphy.
Yeah.
Because 3 element names are very common in period. The other is you add a locative. Also in period, locative names are very common. So, you ever seen the movie Rook's Drift, Zulu?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You remember when the private Joneses are going, he's Jones from Bush Wells, I'm Jones from whatever?
Right.
There's the problem. Because the names replicate so much. In period, they did that too. So you would have a Galen Murphy from Skye, you would have a Galen Murphy from Dublin, you would have a Galen Murphy from, and that's what they would say, that I'm Galen Murphy of Dublin. So that's how you could line the name up, and that might give you, because all you have to have in a name is one element of difference. It might also be, depending on the period and the location, it might change from simple Murphy to Mac Murphy. That's not uncommon either. It would just all depend on the documentation.
Yeah, it's 3 dialect of Galen in Ireland. So,
That's probably more than that. You got to understand something about Ireland. It's not the most invaded country in Europe, but it ain't far from it. The Poles are still farther up the list, and Hungary, Romania come pretty close too. But Ireland comes close. For instance, the city of Dublin. People say it's the Irish city. No, it's not actually. It's a Viking city. The Norse founded it while they occupied Ireland. And the thing is, people say, well, when did the Vikings leave? They didn't. They became part of the population. That's true of the Norse almost everywhere. Wherever they went, if they stayed, they just kind of merged. So you look at England, all of those towns with names that end in B, like Hedby and Thorsby and whatever, those are all old Viking towns. Because at one time, the entire lower 2/3 of England was the Danelaw, and it was ruled by Norway, King Canute. So the Norse occupied it, and they named things according to their taste. Well, a lot of the names still hang on. Ireland's the same way. There was a huge Norse presence in Ireland, and it altered the culture. So it also altered naming practices. It altered all kinds of things. It led to probably the greatest flowering of Irish art, because the Norse like pretty things. And when they combined the Irish art with what the Norse brought, it created a whole new set of styles that were far more brilliant and florid than anything had been seen before. That's another thing, that the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages weren't all that dark. They're actually some of the highest art of the medieval period. You look at Norse gold work or Irish gold work of the period, illumination and calligraphy work, they were all brilliant. The thing is, the reason it's usually referred to as the Dark Ages, because historians mourned the passing of the Roman Empire. With the collapse of the Roman Empire, it's this belief that the world became barbaric, etc. In a sense, yeah. But in other senses, it also opened the door to whole shifts in cultures. Whole new things came that the Romans would have never allowed. They were way too rigid. They wanted things Roman, not anything else. So yeah, it's you see a lot of change all through that era. So from 600 or so through about 1100, when the church begins to dominate again, there's a lot of fluidity and change. So what time period were you thinking?
I'm not sure.
Well,
I haven't thought about it.
Let's put it this way. Do you like to be comfortable, or do you like to be fancy?
Comfortable.
Earlier. The later in period you go, the more complex the clothes get. That's the biggest catch. That's one of the reasons I stick to Viking. It's comfortable. But yeah, it's my inclination has always been to the middle era, early period. So birth of the Viking era is about 793 through about 1100. That's always been my favorite time period, so that's what I study, etc. So everything I say tends to focus on that, because that's where my brain goes. But later styles, there are a lot of people who do late period because they like the more florid styles. They can do more with it. I mean, in my era, the tea tunic is pretty much the complicated form of fashion. Now, what you do to it, on the other hand, that's different. If I'm being formal, I have far more ornamental ones, because what they did, the design of the garments is not complicated, but how they ornamented them could be very complicated. Detailed tablet woven trims, jewelry, pins, brooches, that's their version of fancy. Now that you get later in period, the clothes become more constructed and more tailored. And they get fancier in and of themselves, just in their basic design. So that's one of the things that influences my taste in period. Other people, like I say, prefer the later because they like the style. You take Duke Orlando, the man's a walking peacock. But that's because he loves working with all those ornamental brocades and that, high-end fabrics, silks, etc. It's expensive, but also it's complicated. It's not something I would be comfortable in. Not for the least of which reason is this body does not look good in tights. But But yeah, that's where do you live?
Huntsville.
Huntsville. The local group up there is the Shire of Endonhania. Trying to remember who their current herald is. Don't know, but I can hook you up with John Ellis, Ian. He is he's one of the prime movers in that group up there, and he'll know who their current herald is. I'm not sure who it is right now. But yeah, get with the herald and you can work this out. If he can't do it directly, he can get in touch with me or somebody else. My email and everything is on there.
Yeah.
So it's not hard. It's just like I say, you pick generally what you want, and then you go through the resources till you find the elements that narrow it down. We have books at the house. One way that some people do if they're not sure about a period is we have books on costume, covering a wide range of areas, because my wife does more of the costuming side, the making of things and constructing, and I do mostly leather and metal. She does the fabric, but we let them look through the books and say they'll pick a style and go, I like that style. Okay, well that's 1300s, whatever. That's one of the easy ways for some people to start out. Now, I mean, they'll stay with it. They may go after a while, yeah, this is kind of fun, but I've decided I like this look over here. They'll shift around. I've done everything from my usual Viking up through late period. You ever see Kenneth Branagh's Henry V movie?
I haven't seen that.
He did a real nice version of Henry V. Well costumed, well done, very, very nicely done. But in particular, there was the Marshal of France in that one had a outfit that I liked, so I did that for some years. It's a late period houppelande, which is the full button jacket with the belt sleeves, etc. It's about 1300s vintage. So yeah, every now and then you'll see something that's like, I just like that. I'd like to have one to wear to special things. Sometimes you'll get a crown on the throne, and they'll want to do a themed event, particularly for their own coronation or something. So I've made things for other periods that I don't normally do, just to be part of that. We had a crown a while back that wanted to do, what was it, 14th century Italian. So, I've got a 14th century Italian outfit that I wear once in a blue moon. Things. So it does, just because you pick one thing doesn't mean necessarily that's the only thing you'll ever do. I know people who have just gone one day and said, I've been doing Roman for 10 years. I think I'm going to do, Japanese now, and they'll just change everything.
So that means he have to change his name too.
Oh, they'll change their registered name, the whole 9 yards. That's one of the nice things about the society is since we do cover such a wide range, you can explore pretty much anything. You can try anything for a while. You can. I work at. Like I said, I do mostly leather and metal, but there's a dozen other things that I've taken classes in and learned how to do over the years. Casting work. I do know how to sew. I used to sew my own things before I got married, but she's way better at it than I am. For instance, she never sews her finger to things. I've done that. I've also done armory work. I've done metal casting. I've done glass blowing, stained glass work. That's the nice thing about the society is it's all out there if you just want to go play with it. And period, what your persona, doesn't really have anything to do with that. So yeah, there's always something else. I mean, I've been in it, like I say, off and on now for 35 years, and I'm still finding new stuff to do. I have a little problem finding things that I can see to do anymore. Most of my work these days I have to do at home because I operate under a very large digital magnifier. Like sitting right here, I can see that you're there, but I can't see any detail. It's as if this room were in a fog. So my fine detail is pretty much shot. But I find ways around it. Of course, I scare people sometimes, like when I'm on the live weapons range. It's like, yeah, there's a blind man throwing axes. How could this go wrong? But yeah, it's persona and name creation and armory it's partly taste, it's partly rules, but the rules are there really not to limit what you can do, but to make it easier for everybody to understand what you've chosen to do. So if I give out the blazon, which is the verbal description of a set of armory, to anybody in here who knows heraldry, anybody's been around the society for very long, when I say that, they'll have a picture in their head of what that means, because those words mean the same thing every single time. There's no variable in those descriptions. So that's the thing, is that you may want something that's not exactly definable the way we do it right now, but I bet if we play with it a bit, we can make it, and we can work it out. The biggest problem usually is conflict, because there's, let's see, last time they published stats, there's 300-something thousand items in our own armorial. The armorial is well, it used to be literally a physical book, but it's too big now to be a physical book, it's online. But that's how many items are registered in the SCA armorial. There's a little bit over 300,000 of them. So conflict is usually the biggest problem. But there's so many ways around it that it's not hard to find something. I just did one, the same guy who wants the Romanian name, which I think we finally got worked out. His arms, they were perfect. They went right up to the top, and somebody found a conflict. It's like, what if we just do that? And we added, it was red and black, multiple, with a rampant dragon in gold. And there was one that was almost the same. Not quite, the dragon position was slightly different, but that was only one change. I said, what if we drop a border on it? And they went, that'll work. So I did a quick redraw and sent it back up, and it went on through. So sometimes, you just have to find a little tweak to get around it. Most conflicts are not disastrous. They're just finding something that makes a separation. So, but anyway, anything else? Sources? I mean, anything you want to know?
Yeah, sources would be fine.
What do you know right now in terms of about the society and how we do things, or how much reference do you have?
Very little.
Okay. Oh boy, a whole fresh meat. Oh. Okay. The first thing I would suggest is go to the main SCA page online, sca.org, and go through the resources and stuff listed there and look at the merchants list in particular. Don't necessarily buy anything, just look, and it'll give you an idea of what kind of things are out there. The other thing is attend events. If you don't know anything, that's fine. You don't have to. All that's required to attend an event is some semblance of pre-16th century garb. Most events, if you don't have stuff of your own, will have some kind of loaner supplies. You can find somebody who can either make it for you or help you make it or tell you what to do. That's rarely ever a problem. We have a lot of people who are just gung-ho to make something all the time. So my wife is like that, for instance. We have a dozen projects at the house right now, and none of them are ours. But just don't try to do anything in particular yet. Float around and see what you like. Too many people try to do everything all at one time, and this organization is weird. It seems very casual and very laid back, which in many ways it is. But you can go down a rabbit hole really, really fast, because there's so much that we do, that there's so many different activities, there's so many different functions. Every kind of craft and activity you can think of is out here somewhere. This event today is a very small one, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
I am the event steward, the idiot in charge, for Coronation, which will be the first weekend of April. There'll be over 300 people there. And I've already got a list, a fencing tournament, an archery tournament, a youth tournament, 4 order meetings, arts and sciences functions, classes, 2 major courts, because I have the outgoing Crowns Court and the incoming Crowns Court. That's already on the schedule, and I've only had to bid for 2 weeks. So, that's, you look at Gulf Wars is coming up in March. Have you heard anybody talk about that?
I heard the name, but I don't know that much about it.
Gulf Wars is the largest regional war in this area. It's down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. There'll be around 15,000 people there. It runs a week. The scary thing about Gulf Wars, it's not one of the big ones. It's medium-sized. You look at Penzix. Penzix is in Pennsylvania. Last year they topped out at 47,000 people. It lasts 2 weeks. There's everything you can think of at Penzix and many things you probably don't want to. You put that many crazy people on a site for that long and it gets wild. But I mean, there will literally be merchants at Penzix from Australia, from China, from Europe. There will be attendees from all over the world. It is one of the monster events. That's why I say there's so much out there that you can get into a lot. This kingdom, we have about 34 active groups at the moment. So pretty much every weekend of the year, there's an event going on somewhere. There's almost no weekend on the calendar that there's not something.
Yeah.
They usually avoid Christmas, and they usually avoid the other big holidays, but don't bet on it. For instance, what they call Artsy Crown, which is Kingdom Arts and Sciences and Crown List, that's Memorial Day weekend, 4-day weekend. So they have Arts and Sciences on one day and they have the Crown List on the other day. There's something going on all the time. And that's just for this kingdom, which only comprises Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, a chunk of Florida. That's basically it now. And back in the day I started, this kingdom ran from Memphis to Miami and from the Carolina border to New Orleans. I spent a lot more time on the road. People today get weird when there's an event and it's more than 3 or 4 hours away, and I'm like, I can remember getting off work in the afternoon and driving 7, 8, 9 hours into South Nowhere, Florida. And then turning around on Sunday and driving back and going back to work at 5:30 in the morning on Monday. Of course, I was 20 and I could get away with that crap. Not so much anymore. But yeah, so there's always something. There's this weekend. Next weekend is Midwinter in Decatur, Georgia. That's South Downs, the Barony in Atlanta. That's their Midwinter Arts and Sciences event. Mm-hmm. The weekend after that is Knight's Gambit down at Dalwhinnie. That's down in the woods between Marion and Selma. It's a site down there that we use. That's Knight's Gambit is a fighting event where the knights come out, and it's most of them as an educational function for other fighters, but it's also a lot of fun to watch them all beat up on each other.
Yeah.
But that's, and then the week after that, I forget what's on the calendar, but there's something constantly. You can find those on the Kingdom calendar list on the Kingdom webpage, even though the Kingdom webpage is currently a little dysfunctional. They had problems with the hosting service.
Yeah.
But the calendar is functional. Like I say, then Gulf Wars takes up most of the middle of March, because it's the week before and the week after are pretty much write-offs because everybody's either busy packing or busy trying to recover. Then April 1st is Coronation. Do you understand how we do things about that, where titles and such come from? Okay. The short version. Every 6 months, we hold an event called Crown List. At that list, the people who wish to be king fight. Now, I'm old-fashioned, so I still say king, but today in the modern age, you have to say crown, because it could be a female fighter. There aren't that many of them, but there are a few. And there are some of them that are quite good. And there have been a couple that have actually won the throne. But at that list, they will fight. The victor of that tournament becomes crown prince and princess. They have to be a pair, or crown whatevers they are. They reign as crown prince and princess for 5 months. At the end of that 5 months, that's their training period, basically. At the end of that, they get to be king and queen, or king and king, or queen and queen, or whatever they may be. They're king and queen for 6 months. At the end of that 6 months, a new one takes over. The first thing they do as king and queen 1 month after they take the throne is they hold a new crown list to select a new crown prince and princess. So on the first weekend in April, the event I'm running is Coronation. The new king and queen who are currently crown prince and princess will be crowned. We do that every 6 months, and it stays in constant rotation. Under society rules, the crown's word is law. So they make most of the policies for the kingdom. They set the broader rules, except those which are already covered by national governing rules or by mundane law. Which means most of what they cover are things like titles, awards, etc. They get to pick those. So you've got all this raft of titles. Okay, this is a circlet. In this case, it is 1/2 inch wide. At 1/2 inch, it denotes that I held a grant of arms. That is the second level up of Armiger's award. The first one is an award of arms, and in that case, the circlet would be 1/4 inch. The various forms of pointy hat. I'm not going to try to explain them all because that gets complicated. But they all denote some title, ranging from baron up through king and queen. Mostly, the taller it is, the higher up the food chain it is. So if you see one that's about 1.5 inches, 2 inches high, and probably has little balls on top, that's a baron. If you see one that's a little bigger than that and it's squared, that's a viscount. If you see one that's a little bigger than that and has some kind of point, that's probably a count or an earl. You see a bigger one than that with what looks like strawberry leaves, that's a duke or a duchess. You see ones with big points and shiny, that's probably the crown of the crown prince and princess. Yeah, everybody bows. That's the short form. The long form is we have lots of awards and titles. They all signify different things within different areas. You have the peerages. Knights, pelicans, laurels, and the masters of defense. Knights, they're pretty obvious. They're the heavy fighters. Pelicans, they're not so obvious. Pelicans are given their titles for their administrative and service functions. Laurels, they're the artsy people. They do the crafts and the artistic things. And the masters of defense are the light weapons fighters, the fencers. That's the short version of orders. There's a long version too. Because we got lots more. But those are the peerage level ones. They're denoted by their various regalia. Knights wear a white belt and gold chain generally. Pelicans will have a medallion depicting a pelican, what's called vulning itself. That is, well, Karen.
Yep.
What's a pelican medallion?
Mine actually doesn't have this one. Pelican bowling itself, which is bleeding, so it stabs itself in the chest. Most of them, mine does not have children. Mine does not have a nest.
Yours doesn't have the nest, okay.
So there's normally a nest. The pelican is feeding the children its own blood. So the idea, because that's how that's what they thought pelicans did.
I'm working up a new batch of the design that Linda did about 25 years ago.
Was that the one with the M?
Yes.